Months of negotiations concluded this week with a shaky deal on Iran's nuclear program. Saudi Arabia and its allies pummel Yemen, with airstrikes leaving hundreds killed and cities in ruin. And tragedy in icy waters. 56 crew members died after a trawler sank off Russia's Far East coast. A dozen more still missing. With the top stories of today and of the week, this is The Weekly on RT International. From me, Rory Souchet, and the entire news team, welcome to your headlines. Dozens of meetings in every format imaginable. Diplomats flying in and out of town. It was a long week of negotiations in the Swiss resort town of Lausanne. International representatives gathered there to thrash out a deal on Iran's nuclear program.
You're always optimists, otherwise we wouldn't be here.
I'm not paid to be optimistic.
Thank you, everybody, very much.
You're not paid enough to be optimistic.
Today, we have reached a critical milestone in that quest.
So this is what all the sides have managed to agree upon. For the next decade, Iran will only use one facility to enrich uranium. For 15 years, it will not enrich uranium beyond a certain level, enough for civilian use but not for weapons. Tehran also signed up to that of international inspections, and all of that is in exchange for the scrapping of European and American economic sanctions. The talks were long and grueling, but the diplomats still shared a few smiles and laughs, if at times a bit nervously. And some of them, though, made themselves quite at home with the big Beau Rivage hotel. The marathon talks proved a challenge for the journalists as well. Hours-long stakeouts, meetings lasting well into the night, leaving some reporters to take a nap on the sofas or get some downtime in the hallways, though some didn't plan for such a protracted stay and experienced a shortage of bare necessities. Well, despite all of the effort that went into the talks, political analysts are warning don't be too optimistic about the results.
The United States is already breaking the agreement that it has just signed. We had the same problem last year when the joint plan of action was signed between Iran and the P5+1. Subsequently, the United States repeatedly added new people to the sanctions regime and also new companies to the sanctions regime every couple of months, which the Iranians said was a violation of the agreement. Iran is concerned that the United States may already be moving to undermine the agreement.
Well, soon after the deal was announced, a misunderstanding emerged. Tehran and Washington apparently seeing at least one aspect very differently.
This relief will be phased as Iran takes steps to adhere to the deal. If Iran violates the deal, sanctions can be snapped back into place.
According to international law, the U.S. administration will be responsible for and obliged to lift the sanctions at once. If anybody is talking about the gradual lifting of sanctions, beware that they're going against what has been agreed so far.
And throughout the talks, loud objections were heard from two of Iran's most bitter enemies, Saudi Arabia and Israel.
The concessions offered to Iran in Lausanne would ensure a bad deal that would endanger Israel, the Middle East, and the peace of the world. Israel will not accept an agreement which allows a country that vows to annihilate us to develop nuclear weapons.
And the U.S. Republicans say the deal with Iran is nothing but a set of concessions which it will no doubt use to get its hands on nuclear weapons.
The parameters for a final deal represent an alarming departure from the White House's initial goals.
This is only a list of dangerous U.S. concessions that will put Iran on the path to nuclear weapons.
We simply cannot take President Obama's word that it is this or war.
The next deadline for the agreement with Iran is in June, when a final version is expected to come into force. Of course, here on RT International, we're following all of it very closely on air and online. Well, Iran may be getting some positive Western press over its willingness to compromise on nuclear issues, but the same cannot be said about Tehran's alleged activities ongoing in Yemen.
Its goal is to counter Islamist extremism and Iranian influence in the region.
Iran has been enabling the activity of the Houthis.
Arab coalition that's targeting the Iranian-backed Houthis and their allies.
A Saudi-led coalition of 10 countries is carrying out the offensive against the Shia Houthis in Yemen. Over 10 days, dozens of airstrikes have left more than 500 people confirmed dead. However, former U.S. diplomat James Jatras believes at the end of the day, Riyadh has actually chosen the wrong enemy.
The Houthis are representing a kind of Shiite Islam that's different from the Iranians in any case. I think it's much overstated the extent to which they are an Iranian asset, although the Iranians provide them support. But look, you have Al-Qaeda there, you have ISIS there. These supposedly are the great enemies that Washington is opposed to. I don't see the Saudis bombing them. I see them bombing the Houthis, who are fighting Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Does that make a whole lot of sense?
And the coalition's attempts to quell the Houthis has taken its toll on infrastructure. Airstrikes have left behind scenes of utter devastation. When the invasion started, Sana'a International Airport served as a hub for thousands to flee the combat zone. But as you can see now, it's just a pile of rubble and little else. However, the Houthis still enjoy widespread support among Yemenis, and they show no intention of laying down their arms. The Houthis' anger is directed against Saudi Arabia and its allies, including Washington, which is also supporting the invasion with satellites, logistics and intelligence. The situation on the ground is far from clear-cut because the U.S. and the Houthis also share a common sworn enemy in Yemen, that of Al-Qaeda. Here's Gayane Chichikan.
The Sunni-Shiite divide in Yemen has turned into a full-on war. The first to win from this war will be terrorists. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is most certainly preparing to funnel all that Sunni anger in the direction that they want, just as they've done in Iraq and in Syria. Look at this map of Yemen. The area marked in striped green is where Al-Qaeda is reportedly active. For years, the AQAP, operating in Yemen, has plotted attacks against the U.S. and Europe.
للجمهورية اليمنية. هذه هي الصور الأولى.
The U.S. launched its anti-terror campaign in Yemen in 2002. President Obama intensified the campaign with drone strikes. 3 years ago, President Hadi took office. He was backed by the U.S. In September of last year, President Obama presented Yemen as a model for America's efforts to fight terrorism. That strategy is now in a shambles. Shia rebels in Yemen, the Houthis, have pushed government forces out. Saudi Arabia and other Sunni Gulf states are bombing the Shia rebels, and the U.S. is supporting the Saudi-led campaign. Washington is doing it largely because the departure of a pro-U.S. president means the U.S. loses foothold in Yemen. In February, the U.S. suspended its embassy operations there. In March, U.S. Special Operations Forces blew up their heavy equipment and fled the country. But if the goal is to fight terror in Yemen, bombing the Shia may be counterproductive. Bombs will hardly bring about a political solution between the Shia and the Sunni. The absence of such a political solution will most certainly benefit Al-Qaeda and turn Yemen into an even more dangerous place. In Washington, I'm Ganesh Chekyan, RT.
As ever, when nations play geopolitics, it's the children that bear the brunt. Earlier this week, the UN issued a report saying that at least 62 children have been killed and dozens more injured during the past 7 days alone. They also say hospitals and schools have been severely damaged.
We've had more children killed in Yemen than in all the fighting in 2014. We're heading towards a humanitarian disaster. Parts of Aden city, districts have not received water for 4 days, and the recruitment of children, which is widespread, must cease immediately.
10 past the hour here at Moscow. Russian airplanes are searching for 13 fishermen missing since Thursday. Their trawler sank in the Sea of Okhotsk with 132 crewmen on board. RT correspondent Murad Gazdiev explains what authorities believe happened.
The weather was hardly to blame. Visibility was fine and the wind was nothing unusual by local standards. There was no warning.
We hauled a big load of fish and it caused the tilt. We couldn't level the ship and it became clear the lurch was irreversible.
26 vessels which were nearby joined the rescue operation when it became apparent that disaster had struck. There wasn't even enough time for an SOS signal to be sent.
It was very hard to look at. It was like the Titanic. People were falling. I saw them falling through the air and screaming. It was horrible.
The ship appears to have sunk extremely quickly, and in the freezing conditions, you're likely to go into unconsciousness within sort of 15 minutes, and that's if you can survive the initial cold shock of hitting the water.
Less than half of the crew were rescued.
I got a call saying the ship my brother was on had sunk. It was terrible. I cried and prayed for hours. When I finally got a call, I was too afraid to pick up, thinking the worst.
He called me. He was absolutely shocked. He didn't say a lot, just that he's alive and that he choked on a lot of water, and that he was now on a boat that rescued him.
But many of the survivors are in critical condition. Doctors are treating crew members for shock, hypothermia and frostbite. As for how it all happened, so far there are only theories. According to one, the ship's haul of fish exceeded its limit. Another is that there was a collision.
Icebergs, a tenth of it is above the water and 9/10 of it is below the water. We're currently in April, and of course the polar ice cap is breaking up, and that causes icebergs. It's no coincidence perhaps that it was in April, wasn't it, that the Titanic went down.
An investigation is now underway, but with hopes of finding any more crew slim. The focus now is on helping the critically injured survivors. Murad Gazdiev, RT.
So how about a trip around Europe on the back of an armoured car? NATO troops took in the sights across 6 countries before heading back to their home base in Germany. But what kind of reception did they get? We'll give you that story with RT's Peter Oliver in just a sec.